Welcome to the Russell Kirk Center in Mecosta, Michigan, a village in the middle of the state that was founded by Russell's great-grandfather in the late 19th century. I'm Annette Kirk, the widow of Russell Kirk, to whom I was married for 30 years. In 1954, Russell purchased this building, and it was then known previously as Mecosta Wood Products. In addition to the regular furniture that was made in this building, the company also made dollhouses, furniture for dollhouses, and cigarette rollers, an unlikely combination. It was in this building that Russell wrote most of his 32 books, and where for decades he and I hosted seminars and residential fellows. In 1995, a year after Russell died, the Russell Kirk Center was created to continue his work of promulgating the permanent things. Before we take a walk into this library, I'd like to show you a brief video about the Russell Kirk Center and its programs.
Since 1995, the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal has been here in Mecosta, seeking to recover and to conserve and enliven those enduring moral and political principles that Russell Kirk referred to as the permanent things. And it's those permanent things that have always been at the hub of the conservative sort of contribution to education and to politics in America.
Well, there's no denying that the conservative movement is one of the most important political movements in America today. We would, in fact, not be the conservative movement if it were not for Russell Kirk. He gave us our name, and he also gave us a philosophy by which we can guide ourselves. With his understanding of philosophies, understanding of history, he was able to bring it together to undergird our political movement, for which, thank heavens.
This is the home of conservatism, literally, because it is the home of Russell Kirk. It's his library where he worked. And it is, in a figurative sense, the home, because this is where the main, deepest, sort of most enduring principles of conservatism were formulated and articulated and sort of launched out in the form of books, speeches, and essays around the country and indeed around the world. The Kirk Center is foremost a residential research and study center. It's a living community of students and scholars that come together and work on research projects, writing projects, theses, sabbaticals the professors might take to finish books or essays. The main part of that community of writings is our Wilbur Fellowship Program, and the Wilbur Fellowship Program exists to give students research grants to reside for a period of time so that they can complete these kind of writing projects, and to give faculty a variety of faculty research grants and or other residential grants. And so the Residential Study Center is really central to what we've been doing here at the Russell Kirk Center for the last 2 decades. We also have a vibrant seminar and conference program where students come for a variety of period of times, from a week to a long weekend to a day program. And those have been the 2 core projects here at the Kirk Center. Another one of the Kirk Center's programs is the publication of the University Bookman, which is the oldest conservative-oriented book review publication in the country. And it's a very lively place of encounter, as I said, for conservative higher learning online at theuniversitybookman.org or thekirkcenter.org. Recently, we started a new program we're calling Kirk on Campus, to take the Russell Kirk Center's program and also Russell Kirk's writings himself out on the road, so to speak, out on the campuses where Russell Kirk himself played such an important role in the national debates in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s.
What if there were no Kirk Center? What would be the absence if there were no Kirk Center? And I think it would be a gaping hole in the conservative movement, an enormous hole, a Grand Canyon, if you will, without the Kirk Center and without its examination of ideas, without its, I think, promotion of an essential part of the conservative movement, which is the traditional conservative stream of ideas which make up such a big and important part of the mighty river which we know as modern American conservatism.
The Kirk Center is very much part of that dream of keeping America's constitutional tradition alive and renewing it for the next generation, and hopefully to sort of deepen their lives and the lives of the culture around them and the ways that they touch their families, their churches, and their schools moving forward, that they'll take what they learned from the Kirk Center into that cultural arena and help renew it, so that when that stream goes back down to politics, the political order is redeemed and the American order is once again the bright beacon light for the world.
Here we are on the inside of Russell's library, where we have a display of all of his books. On this table, there are 32 of his books, but that does not include all the translations of his works, which we have on this shelf. The translations include ones from Brazil, Poland, South Korea, Italy, Russia, China, Turkey, and Japan. Here we are in the main room of the library, where I'm joined by Jeff Nelson. Jeff is the co-founder of the Russell Kirk Center and is its vice chairman. In true Kirkian fashion, Jeff went to a Scottish university where he obtained his doctorate and wrote a dissertation on Edmund Burke.
Oh, thank you, Annette, and welcome to the inner room of Russell Kirk's library as we celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Kirk Center. This is the space where Russell Kirk wrote so many of his great works. It's also the space where students across generations have come to research and reside in our community here. It's a place where professors have come to work on important writing projects, and a place where guests have come from around the world and indeed around the country to partake in Russell Kirk Center seminars, our Piety Hill seminars, and also to take advantage of the research opportunities here. It's a special place, and we're glad you could be with us here tonight. Before we take a tour of Russell Kirk's library and see the ways in which he organized it, I want to briefly mention that a highlight of this anniversary gala is our anniversary campaign. The anniversary campaign is central to this event and also to our plans moving forward for the future. We have a goal of $250,000, and I'm glad to say tonight that we've reached more than 50% of that goal. So thank you very much to the supporters who have already contributed to the campaign. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to do so yet, I encourage you to visit our website, kirkcenter.org. You'll see a clear pathway to the anniversary campaign. We have many giving societies now. We just introduced some cool premiums. And tonight, especially, we want to emphasize that if you give a gift of any amount, you will receive a free ebook that we just are releasing now, Russell Kirk Selected Writings for Our Time, Volume 1. It's an exciting enterprise to start this new series, and for donors of any amount, you'll receive this Volume 1 of the new ebook collection immediately. It's a collection of 5 essays that I've organized and edited for your enjoyment. Gives you hopefully a nice brief overview of the range of Kirk's thought. And we are planning in the future, as we roll out successive volumes of the series, to include some really cool stuff from the archives that has never been published before. So give a gift today of any amount, receive the ebook, you'll get on our list, you'll hear more about some of the fun ebooks that we're releasing. These ebooks are really beautiful, beautifully designed, very easy to read, so I think you'll enjoy those. Well, now let's take a look at the library. Well, this is the inner corner of the inner room of Russell Kirk's library, and it's where he actually wrote the great works that we're so familiar with today. This is his writing table. It was actually his grandfather's dining room table. His maternal grandfather, Frank Pierce, used it as a dining room table, and Dr. Kirk repurposed it as his writing table. On the writing table, you see one of his earliest typewriters that he used pretty much in the 30s and early 40s. It was his Uncle Ray's typewriter that he borrowed to get some of his early works written and submitted. In his later days, like most people, he switched to an electric typewriter, but a standard fare, and was able to complete most of his works here. But this is the space. It's a wonderful writing corner. Up above him was a literary reference section, kind of a writer's toolkit, where he would have manuals of style and books of quotations and dictionaries and various sorts of references that every writer of the time would have. Dr. Kirk was a fabulous typist. Any of his assistants would join me in saying he typed incredibly fast. He was very proud that he could type well over 100 words per minute. And that was impressive to see his fingers flying night after night in so many different kinds of writings, from essays to columns to book chapters to short stories, letters, all kinds of things coming off his typewriter. But even more impressive was how clean they were, so how few edits were needed when they came off. Now, this was the time before, obviously, cut and paste, which we all rely on to sort of, cover for our many typing sins. So every typing word, every page was money, and he was money. You had to be good, to be professional, and he was all that. So that's just one of the interesting things about Russell Kirk and the way that he went about his business. He was a nocturnal writer, as some people know, meaning he wrote at night, and he really wrote at night. We assistants would go to gather at 8 or 9 and get assignments from him from the vast correspondence of the day, what we were going to reply to on behalf and what he was going to reply to, and then if we were going to do help on a particular writing project, or if we were going to pursue our own projects. But Kirk himself, he was dedicated all through the night. He would really kick up at going at 10 or 11, and by 5, 6, 7 in the morning, he'd still be going and then leaving the library, his workday through, and as many projects done. So he's quite an interesting figure in terms of his writing style. When the donut shop was opened down the street some years ago, he was always the first to get a hot, warm donut early in the morning after a long night of writing. So that's kind of Russell Kirk's style. His habit of writing, his habit of organization, the way he organized his library is a frequently asked question. Of course, a private library, a personal library is just that, it's personal. Your libraries are no less personal than Dr. Kirk's library. He had a very particular way he liked to organize his collection, his vast collection of more than 12,000 books in the inner library. Now we have an extra 3,000 to 4,000 in an annex. And he liked to organize it by discipline in a ways that he could easily get to from his desk. Sitting from his desk, he had the panoramic view of his library before him. He knew where all the books that he needed were. It started right next to him with the Greek and Roman classics, so you're starting here in the beginning. Then the largest section of the library was humane letters, literature, literary criticism, biography. It swept all across the outer wall, parts of the back wall, and then down into an inner wall, kind of a long J. Very big section of literature and literary criticism, humane letters, as he called it. Some people are surprised by that that's Russell Kirk's largest section. They think so politically. But if you know a little bit about Russell Kirk, it makes perfect sense. In the center of the library, which also makes perfect sense, was the American history section, a very good section, a very important section, right in the center of everything. Just off that section was politics and social thought, which is a very nice selection, collection on one wall, and then on the outer walls just under a window sill. So it's a large collection. Just after that, he had kind of something special and unique to him, a section he called philosophical historians. Variety of thoughtful philosophical historians were very important in his own thinking, and he had them in one collection. Figures like Christopher Dawson, John Lucas, Herbert Butterfield, Eric Voegelin, for sure. These were important thinkers that he kept in a section he called philosophical historians. After that, he went to economics and then to history, national histories galore, various historical studies of some note, mainly Western, but there were some non-Western histories as well. And that would bring us back right to our desk. Now, you might be thinking, you're hearing of the various sections I mentioned, where's theology and philosophy? Well, the inner library couldn't hold that section. It's the second largest section. So on the outer part of the library where you saw Annette Kirk early on, behind her was several big walls of books, which housed his pretty significant philosophy and religion section. I would say a little more heavy on religion, but a very good dose of philosophy. So that gives you a little overview of how Dr. Kirk organized his library and what's here and how researchers and students have used this to such great benefit in their cultural studies through the years. I hope you'll stay with us for just a little longer, because in about 10 minutes you're going to hear from the distinguished, wonderful historian of intellectual conservatism, Dr. George Nash, who will speak to us tonight as part of our celebration. George is such a graceful writer and speaker, and listening to him always repays. So I encourage you to stay with us. In the meantime, we're going to walk over here for a special treat. And now I'd like to introduce Russell Kirk's second daughter, Cecilia Kirk Nelson. Cecilia came on board at the Russell Kirk Center just 2 years ago, but her influence is already being felt. Celia?
Here above the fireplace, we have stone reliefs carved by Hugh Lorimer, a Scottish sculptor and friend of my dad's. In the middle is theology with the sword of faith, justice with the wig and the book, and history with the scroll and the quill pen. My dad had them shipped across the Atlantic in 1960. I found out when I was reading the correspondence this summer that they were a little damaged in the process. Here's the original letter that he wrote to Hugh in 1960. 2 nights ago, I turned sculptor and plaster. Your 3 allegorical statues suffered some rather severe chipping in shipment. They have been handsomely fitted between the mantelpiece and ceiling of my library and look as if they were designed for the situation. I went to work on them with patching plaster, a little soot from the fireplace, and 2 paring knives. I'm proud of my work. You wouldn't know now that they have been wounded by British Railways and Holland American Lines. They are much admired. This table before the fireplace is where my dad would meet with his literary assistants to put together the journal, The University Bookman. Some of you remember the early print issues of the Bookman. It's now published online as a weekly review, edited by Gerald Rossello out of New York. If you'd like to receive the Bookman and you don't already, please go ahead and sign up at our website for that, as well as for the Kirk Center's monthly e-letter. We added a new section to the website recently called Classic Kirk, to make the best of my dad's essays available at their online home. Now let's go over to the conference room. On our way to the conference room, I wanted to stop and show you this little award here from the Count Dracula Society. Most people know my dad for his nonfiction, but he also wrote short stories and a Gothic romance. And in some circles, he was very well known as a fiction writer instead. This award is the Mrs. Anne Radcliffe Award for his modern Gothic romance and for his ghost stories. And we'll go right into the conference room. I'd like to introduce Alex Miragalia, the archivist, to show us a few artifacts.
Thanks, Cecilia. I have on the desk in front of me the 2 volumes that Dr. Kirk wrote for his dissertation at St. Andrews, which he finished in 1952. Originally titled The Conservative's Route, an account of conservative ideas from Burke to Santayana, Dr. Kirk would turn this into his best-known work, The Conservative Mind, just 2 years later, and was published by the Henry Regnery and Company. On the wall over here, we have the Presidential Citizens Medal, awarded to Dr. Kirk by President Ronald Reagan in 1989, in which President Reagan calls Dr. Kirk the prophet of American conservatism. And on the wall here, we have just one example of the many letters between poet T.S. Eliot and Dr. Kirk. And this is a Christmas card to Dr. Kirk from 1954. Let's now go meet the director of the Wilbur Fellows, Wesley Reynolds. I'm excited to have you meet Wesley. Wesley, hi.
Thank you. Here is our 18th century studies collection, which hosts some of the finest works in London's literary renaissance. The center hosts one of the leading journals in 18th century ideas, Studies in Edmund Burke and His Times. The significance to our collection is that the great London wits, as they were so called, redefined the English language into a colloquial language and systematically defined the daily newspaper, political debate, contemporary economics, classical painting, and so much more. 2 towering figures stand at the center of our collection, Edmund Burke, the great British parliamentarian who first warned of the dangers of revolutionary political ideology in his reflections on the French Revolution, and Dr. Samuel Johnson, who first argued that order in the community stems ultimately from the proper ordering of one's own soul. So in politics and in economics, we have the complete works of Edmund Burke and his correspondence. Also, Charles Fox and Adam Smith fairly represented. In social commentary, we have the works of Dr. Samuel Johnson and original 18th century editions of his rather lengthy comments on English letters. These are certainly the oldest pieces in our collection. Also, we have the works of Jonathan Swift, the great Tory political satirist, who you might know from Gulliver's Travels. In art and poetry, we have the essays of Sir Joshua Reynolds, the great classical painter, and also the correspondence of Alexander Pope. There's an American section and Scottish Enlightenment section, which is the perfect complement to our 18th century collection. This is frequently well used by leading experts in the field. For nearly 5 decades, students and scholars have been coming from all around the world to study in Kirk's private library. The Wilbur Fellows program is there to enliven the next generation with what Russell Kirk termed the permanent things of life. That is, the moral principles of order, liberty, and humanity, which lie at the root of our civilization. Our fellows will go on to renew our communities with a love for custom, convention, and continuity, in opposition to the deadening and destructive ideologies of the 20th and 21st centuries. Fundamental then to our scholarly approach is the cultivation of the moral imagination, a sense of higher judgment and good taste which stems from our classical and Christian roots and includes our American heritage. We hope to bridge the gap between the way in which our grandparents and great-grandparents spoke of our cultural inheritance. Scholars come to the library to read the great conservative literary tradition, which includes classical literature and philosophy, various church scholastics, medieval heroic romance, 18th and 19th century commentators, the American founders, and lastly, the great conservative humanists of our own times, including T.S. Eliot, Christopher Dawson, Eric Voegelin, C.S. Lewis, and of course, Russell Kirk himself. Our fellows finish a course of study which is deeper and richer than the average academic program, one which is steeped in the great conversation of humanity and culture. There are truly too few places where conservatives can come for a time and congregate as an academic community. And here at Piety Hill in Mecosta, Michigan, there's a place for those who love that which is truly good and old in the world. Our fellows are already renewing our communities, families, and educational institutions. I think Dr. Kirk would have been proud of what we've achieved in the past 25 years and what we will achieve in the next 25. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce our board member, David Corey.
I'm David Corey. I'm a member of the board here at the Kirk Center and have been a longtime supporter of its mission to preserve and transmit the permanent things. On behalf of the board and all those who have supported the Kirk Center today and in the past, we would like to ask that you join us in supporting the Kirk Center and the important work that it does by joining one of our supporter circles, such as the Mecosta Circle, where by joining you'll receive this handsome leather bookmark crafted by a local bookbinder, or the Burke Circle, where your name will be inscribed on a permanent display here in the library, where all those who seek the wisdom of the ages will still and always find it. Thank you, and thank you for your support.
And now it's time for our feature talk at the Russell Kirk Center's 25th anniversary gala by Dr. George H. Nash. Dr. Nash is the Dean of American Conservative History. His landmark book, The Conservative Intellectual Movement in America, is a must-read. He's an official biographer of Herbert Hoover, and he's also working on currently on a large manuscript detailing the relationship between Herbert Hoover and Franklin Roosevelt. Significantly for us, since nearly our beginnings, Dr. Nash has been a senior fellow of the Russell Kirk Center. He's one of our earliest senior fellows. He distinguishes us, and we're very privileged and proud of our association with Dr. Nash through the years, and we're especially grateful to him for taking time out of his schedule to be with us tonight. George?
Thank you for that very gracious introduction, and hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be in your company this evening, if only virtually because of the constraints of the pandemic. It is even more of a pleasure to speak to you as we celebrate the first 25 years in the life of the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal. During that time, I have had the honor of being associated with the center as a senior fellow and advisor. I cherish this association and the friendships that have developed from it. I've been asked to speak for a few minutes today on the significance of Russell Kirk's work and its bearing on the purposes and programming of the center that carries his name. As most of you know, Dr. Kirk passed away in 1994 at the age of 75. But he has not been forgotten. Indeed, in the past few years, there has been an upsurge of interest in his career and writings. One thinks of the publication of James Person's sparkling collection and edition of Kirk's letters, of Professor Bradley Burzer's prize-winning biography, and the recent republication of Kirk's best-selling novel, Old House of Fear, and his 1957 book now titled Russell Kirk's Concise Guide to Conservatism. One thinks also of the flood of retrospective essays about him that appeared in 2018 on the occasion of the centenary of his birth. And consider this: in 2020, Kirk's masterful book, The Conservative Mind, remains in print nearly 70 years after its publication. A remarkable feat. Moreover, it continues to be translated into foreign languages, including recently Turkish, Korean, and Japanese. What accounts for this burgeoning interest? Some of it, no doubt, reflects America's deepening political turmoil and the widespread perception that the contemporary conservative intellectual community is in disarray. In these unsettling circumstances, the impulse is strong to revisit the writings of conservatism's founding fathers. But there is a second reason, I believe, which is linked to the kind of conservatism that Russell Kirk espoused and personified. As everyone at this gathering knows, Dr. Kirk's second book, The Conservative Mind, published in 1953, was his magnum opus. There, he demonstrated that intelligent conservatism was not a mere smokescreen for selfishness or privilege. It was an attitude toward life with substance and moral force of its own. After the appearance of The Conservative Mind, the American intellectual landscape assumed a different shape. Kirk's book, his tour de force, breached the wall of liberal condescension. He made it respectable for sophisticated men and women to identify themselves as people of the right. Above all, the conservative mind stimulated the development of a self-consciously conservative intellectual movement in America in the early years of the Cold War. In the words of the book's publisher, Henry Regnery, Kirk gave an amorphous, scattered opposition to liberalism an identity. For most scholars, the publication of a book of this distinction would be the culmination of a career. For Kirk, who was only 34 at the time, it was just an opening salvo. In the years to come, he founded two influential journals, Modern Age and the University Bookman, both of which still exist. He published a regular column for more than 2 decades in National Review, wrote a major biography of T.S. Eliot, and a classic history entitled The Roots of American Order. He did more than anyone living to revive Edmund Burke as a fountainhead of conservative thought. He completed a superb memoir called The Sword of Imagination, and churned out a prodigious torrent of other writings. In all, he published more than 24 nonfiction books, several volumes of novels and collected short stories, 255 book reviews, 814 essays and short pieces published in periodicals, and nearly 3,000 newspaper columns. If Kirk's career was notable for its astounding productivity, it was also remarkable for its variety and breadth. Over the years, he wore many hats. He was a historian, biographer, memoirist, novelist, lecturer, professor, essayist, editor, and at every turn, a defender of what he called the permanent things. His commitment to his vocation was unflagging. This leads me to another point worth underscoring. Russell Kirk was no academic pedant. He was a scholar with a mission. This was evident both early and late in his career. In 1952, shortly before he published The Conservative Mind, he confided to a friend that the forthcoming book was intended to be my contribution to our endeavor to conserve the spiritual and intellectual and political tradition of our civilization. And if we are to rescue the modern mind, we must do it very soon. The struggle, he said, will be decided in the minds of the rising generation, and within that generation, substantially by the minority who have the gift of reason. In a conversation late in his life, Kirk returned to this theme. To an interviewer, he told a story about a forgotten mill pond in the village of Mecosta, Michigan, where he now lived. Since boyhood, he recalled, he had enjoyed tossing pebbles into this pond and watching the ripples that, in his words, spread outward, circle upon circle, until they reached the shore. To Kirk, these ripples came to symbolize his vocation as one of America's most distinguished conservative intellectuals. From his bailiwick on Piety Hill in Mecosta, he told the interviewer, he was endeavoring, and I quote, to impart an understanding of great lives, great institutions, and great works of imagination. He hoped, he said, that these ideas might, like those ripples in the pond, spread to distant shores, and, in words he quoted from T.S. Eliot, redeem the time, redeem the dream. For Kirk, this task of redemption entailed far more than engaging in politics. In The Conservative Mind and subsequent writings, he repeatedly instructed readers that political problems are fundamentally religious and moral problems, and that cultural renewal requires remedies at deeper levels than economics. Tirelessly, he focused our minds on the crucial realm of the value-creating and value-sustaining institutions of society. More than any other conservative writer of his era, he elevated the tone and substance of conservative discourse, and in the process, elevated our vision. By calling Kirk a scholar with a mission, I would not want you to infer that he was a zealot. To the contrary, he detested ideologues and fanatics. Time and again, he insisted that conservatism was not a doctrinaire ideology, reducible to bumper sticker slogans and soundbite certitudes. As a guardian of ancient wisdom, common sense, and prudence, it was an antidote to the follies of the hollow men and the terrible simplifiers. Nor would I want you to think that because Kirk was a learned and bookish man, he was indifferent to the worldly concerns of politics and economics. Not so. In the early 1960s, for instance, he helped to launch the Goldwater for President movement, and even ghostwrote 2 speeches for Senator Goldwater. In the 1980s, he met Ronald Reagan, who bestowed upon him the prestigious Presidential Citizens Medal. In 1992, appalled by President George H.W. Bush's conduct of the first Gulf War, Kirk publicly supported Patrick Buchanan's insurgent candidacy for the presidency. And of course, he wrote about political subjects from time to time. But fundamentally, Kirk realized that political activism was not his calling. He was rather a moralist and man of letters, whose vocation, as he saw it, was to remind us, in Robert Frost's words, of the truths we keep coming back and back to. Like all of us, Kirk lived in the present. But his mental universe was never bounded by the parochialism of the present. In his voluminous writings, he strove to enlarge his American readers' comprehension of the past. This effort was particularly on display in his panoramic book, The Roots of American Order, in which he organized the story of Western civilization around the great contributions of 5 iconic cities: ancient Athens, Jerusalem, Rome, London, and the Philadelphia of 1776 and 1787. For Kirk, American civilization was part of what he called the grander tradition and continuity, the legacy of our civilization. Without hesitation, he placed himself within this tradition and wielded his sword of imagination against its foes. But Kirk's time horizon did not only extend far into the past, it also extended into the future. Have you ever noticed how often in his writings he saluted what he called the rising generation? Kirk was not an irascible reactionary like General Bullmoose in the Broadway musical Lil Abner. General Bullmoose, who declared in stentorian tones, "Progress is the root of all evil. Bring back the good old days." Russell Kirk was no worshiper of progress, but he could be surprisingly cheerful even in the gloomiest of times. And he made it a point in his lectures and writings to reach out to young people, the rising generation, and engage their imaginations. Furthermore, and this is crucial, he indefatigably practiced what he preached. Beginning in the 1960s, he hired young literary assistants, some of them graduate students, who lived with him for a year or more in Mecosta. In many cases, he mentored them, and not a few of them eventually made their own mark in the academic world. During the last 20 years of his life, with the devoted assistance of his wife Annette, he held periodic conferences called Piety Hill Seminars in his home and library. A total of something like 2,000 students and professors from the United States and a number of other nations participated in these events. For some, it was a life-changing experience. With the help of the Wilbur Foundation, he created, in effect, his own informal campus in this rural and small town corner of Michigan. Kirk once referred to St. Andrews University in Scotland, where he obtained his doctorate, as the apotheosis of coziness. The same might be said of his home and campus on Piety Hill in Mecosta. It says a lot about Kirk and his traditionalist brand of conservatism that although he traveled extensively throughout much of the world, he rooted himself in a village and home built by his own ancestors. To put it simply, Kirk, in his lifestyle, modeled and embodied what he believed. I therefore find it singularly fitting that the Russell Kirk Center for Cultural Renewal, established to perpetuate his legacy, has chosen to maintain its offices and conduct much of its programming at this very site. Since 1995, the center has hosted thousands of students and hundreds of academics, lawyers, and young professionals at its seminars and lectures held in Kirk's own library, where he wrote most of his books. Many of these visitors have come from colleges and universities far from Michigan. Discussions have explored a remarkable range of topics in law, literature, history, and political science, reflecting the extraordinary range of Kirk's own scholarly pursuits. The center, which owns several houses near Kirk's library, has provided stipends and housing to dozens of graduate students known as Wilbur Fellows, who have come to live in Mecosta for a spell to complete their dissertations and other projects in a contemplative atmosphere. With a splendid library of 15,000 volumes and an archive of Kirk's papers as an additional resource, the center, in the words of Annette Kirk, serves as a haven of higher learning. But the center's sphere of activity is by no means confined to Mecosta. For example, the center publishes online the University Bookman, which Kirk founded and edited for many years, and which just marked its 60th anniversary. The center also publishes the annual Journal of the Edmund Burke Society of America and facilitates the translation of Kirk's work into other languages. Recently, it launched a Kirk on Campus project to bring speakers and Kirk's concise guide to conservatism to Midwestern colleges and universities, as well as study groups throughout the United States. In all these forms of outreach, it seems to me, it has been faithful to Kirk's educational mission. And yes, in this age of technology, the center maintains a presence on Twitter and Facebook, as well as a robust website that now receives well over 20,000 visits per month. Just as Kirk counseled in his lifetime, the center is seeking with success to communicate to the rising generation. Here I wish to add a word, especially to those who may be watching from afar, about what the Russell Kirk Center is not. As someone remarked to me recently, it is not a club, nor is it some kind of a clique where only a few initiates are welcome. Although it draws sustenance and inspiration from Kirk's writings and example, its programming is not exclusively Kirk-centered, nor, I think, would Kirk himself want it to be. In the great chain of being that we call Western civilization, he was a sturdy link. But he never stopped reminding us of the links that came before him and of our need to recognize and preserve the chain. So too it is with the center, as it seeks to draw us outward and upward, beyond the confines of our passions and present-mindedness. Nor is the Kirk Center, in any conventional sense, a think tank. It issues no policy papers aimed at politicians and the chattering classes. Ensconced in the relative remoteness of rural Michigan, it is far from the nation's centers of political and economic power. Now, some may see these features as drawbacks. I see them as enhancements for the distinctive perspective that the center brings to the conservative cause. The Russell Kirk Center is unusual among American conservative organizations, focusing not on current events, but on what Ronald Reagan once called the ancient truths of our civilization. And the center is unique among American conservative institutions in being intimately associated with the home and library of one of the movement's founders. And that is significant. In some ineffable way, the environment of Piety Hill and the seminars that occur there convey and cultivate a sense of community, which most visitors find very appealing. Here, one can read without distraction and converse without ideological polemics. It is a place conducive to the pursuit of cultural renewal. Nearly 40 years ago, President Reagan publicly praised Russell Kirk for renewing interest in what Reagan called the permanent things which are the underpinnings of the conservative revival in our nation. I like the word underpinnings. As mentioned earlier, Kirk was not indifferent to politics or to one's duties as a citizen. But fundamentally, his conservatism was pre-political and trans-political. This was one of his greatest contributions to the conservative cause, and one reason why many young people respond to his writings today. Now, whenever an institution is established to lengthen the shadow, as it were, of a great person, there is a risk. For institutions can atrophy over time, or even get captured by those who may not share the founder's intentions. This has not happened with the Russell Kirk Center, nor do I expect it to, in part because it has carefully planted its roots where he lived and wielded his sword of imagination. I close with a thought from the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset, a man I think Russell Kirk admired. Years ago, Ortega wrote, "The simple process of preserving our present civilization is supremely complex and demands incalculably subtle powers." How true that is. For 25 years, the Russell Kirk Center has engaged in this endeavor, to which Kirk himself devoted his career. Tonight, we celebrate the center's achievements with gratitude. Tomorrow, let us move onward, refreshed, into the next quarter century. Thank you, and good evening.
As our anniversary celebration draws to a close, I want to thank the staff of the Russell Kirk Center, the staff you haven't met, who have done so much to help make this event so wonderful. Christina Beers, the administrative assistant for the Russell Kirk Center. Christina keeps all the Macasta-oriented activity going and keeps everything on time and very efficient. So very thankful for all you've done to help make this such a wonderful occasion. And Chris Marlink has come out from behind the camera here, our media manager who makes us look good on social media, on the website, all our marketing materials. Thanks, Chris, for all you do. I also want to give thanks to our board members who couldn't be with us tonight. Chairman State Senator Joanne Emmons has meant so much from us for the Kirk Center since the very beginning as chairman. So we miss you, Joanne, and thanks for being with us. Our treasurer, Kevin Shields in Baltimore. Kevin, thanks for keeping us solvent and pointing us in a positive, balanced direction, especially these last year or so, and for all your hard work. And we're very grateful to Ben Lockhart, a literature professor at Grand Valley State, who also serves on our fellowship committee here at the center. And our academic advisor, Jeff Paulette at Hope College, is doing wonderful things to help with the integrity of the academic program, and is also bringing lots of students up from West Michigan, so we really appreciate that. Now it's time to turn the program back over to Annette for a happy, joyful close.
We are now ready to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Russell Kirk Center with Russell's famous Macasta fruit punch, the only recipe he ever created. It consists of fruit juices, freshly brewed tea, and liqueurs. The liqueurs are optional, but when Russell made the punch, we always had liqueurs. Now, for the toast. Thank you, Alex.
To the next 25 years of the Russell Kirk Center.
You're here.
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Yeah.
Long live the Russell Kirk Center.
Thanks for being with us tonight and for your support.